My name is Lucinda, and I'm 34 years old. The morning my older brother Marcus fired me from our family's luxury resort empire, I did something that terrified him more than any lawsuit ever could. I smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic one, but a genuine, confident smile that made his hands shake as he watched me sign those termination papers. He had no idea I'd been preparing for this moment for 3 months. Before I tell you how that smile cost him everything he thought he'd stolen from me, let me ask where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how one woman turned betrayal into the sweetest victory, because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Growing up in the Hastings family meant breathing hospitality from your first breath. Our father, Robert Hastings, started with one small hotel in Miami back in 1985. While other kids played with toys, I sat in his office learning about occupancy rates and guest satisfaction scores. Marcus, 3 years older than me, preferred the country club to the conference room. He was the golden son who could charm anyone at a party, but couldn't tell you the difference between RevPAR and ADR if his trust fund depended on it. I graduated from Cornell's hotel school in 2008, top of my class with a thesis on emerging luxury travel markets that caught the attention of several industry leaders. Marcus barely scraped through his business degree at a state school, spending more time networking at fraternity parties than studying financial models. Dad hired us both anyway. Family was family after all. Between 2010 and 2015, I built 3 new resorts from the ground up. The Hawaii property transformed a struggling beachfront into a destination that attracted Hollywood celebrities and tech billionaires. Our Caribbean resort became the #1 honeymoon destination in the region within 18 months. The Aspen location redefined mountain luxury with a waiting list that stretched 2 years out. Each property increased our company revenue by over $100 million annually. I lived and breathed those projects, spending months on site, working 18-hour days, missing birthdays and holidays to ensure every detail exceeded our standards. Marcus, meanwhile, held the title of Vice President of Marketing. His campaigns were flashy but ineffective, burning through budgets, while our competitors' market share grew. He hired his college friends as consultants, approved expensive photo shoots in exotic locations that produced mediocre results, and took credit for successes that belonged to his team. I watched him fumble presentation after presentation to investors saved only by Dad's interventions and my last-minute rescue strategies. The real shift happened in 2016. Dad suffered a massive stroke during a board meeting. I was in Bali scouting our next location when Sophie, our younger sister, called me crying. I flew back immediately, spending 3 weeks by his hospital bed while Marcus appeared for photo opportunities and press statements. When Dad finally passed the will reading, shocked everyone except Marcus. We received equal shares of the company, 40% each, with Sophie getting 20%. But there was one detail that changed everything. Marcus was named Chief Executive Officer. It's tradition, our lawyer explained, avoiding my eyes. Your father believed the eldest son should lead the company. I swallowed my disappointment and focused on what I did best, building our empire. Over the next few years, I developed our VIP membership program that grew to 15,000 ultra-high net worth individuals, each paying $50,000 annually, just for the privilege of booking our resorts. I negotiated partnerships with 3 major cruise lines, adding $20 million in annual revenue. My network of travel influencers and luxury bloggers generated more authentic marketing than Marcus's entire department. The turning point came when Forbes interviewed me for their Women Reshaping Luxury Hospitality feature. They barely mentioned Marcus, focusing instead on my innovations and vision for the company's future. The morning that article published, I found Marcus in my office holding the magazine. "Interesting article?" he said, his jaw clenched. "They seem to have forgotten who actually runs this company." "They asked about operations and growth strategy," I replied carefully. "Those are my areas." His eyes narrowed. "Everything in this company is my area, Lucinda. Maybe it's time you remembered that." That conversation marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it then. Marcus had always been insecure, but success had transformed that insecurity into something darker. He couldn't stand that investors asked for me by name, that staff looked to me for guidance, that our biggest clients had my personal cell phone number. In his mind, I wasn't his partner in growing our father's legacy. I was his competition. 6 months before my termination, Marcus made his first strategic move. He hired Derek Thompson as our new Chief Financial Officer. Derek and Marcus had been fraternity brothers, and Derek's resume was impressive on paper. though his experience was primarily in hostile takeovers and corporate raids. I should have seen the warning signs when Derek immediately requested a comprehensive audit of all my projects. Standard procedure, Derek assured me during our first meeting, his smile never reaching his eyes. We need to ensure all departments are operating at peak efficiency. The Bali Resort project was my crown jewel, a $50 million development that would establish Meridian luxury resorts in the Asian market. I'd spent 2 years cultivating relationships with local officials, negotiating land rights, and designing a property that honoured Balinese culture while delivering 5-star luxury. 3 weeks after Derek's arrival, Marcus called an emergency budget meeting. $50 million is excessive, Marcus announced, Derek nodding beside him. We're cutting it to $30 million effective immediately. That's impossible, I protested. We've already committed to local contractors' ordered materials. The architectural plans alone cost $2 million. Then you'll have to get creative, Derek said smoothly. A good executive works within their budget. I knew they were setting me up to fail, but I couldn't prove it yet. That changed when Jennifer, my executive assistant who'd been with me for 7 years, knocked on my door one evening looking nervous. I shouldn't be telling you this, she whispered, closing the door behind her. But there was a meeting today. You weren't invited. She handed me a printed email she'd managed to screenshot. Marcus had convened a secret board meeting to discuss concerns about Lucinda's project management and fiscal responsibility. My name was being systematically destroyed behind closed doors while I was kept busy with impossible demands. The sabotage escalated quickly. 5 of my biggest clients suddenly received calls from Derek offering to personally manage their accounts. When they asked why I was being replaced, he hinted at internal restructuring and performance issues. Mrs. Chen, whose family's corporation booked 200 rooms annually, called me directly. Lucinda, what's happening over there? This Derek person is suggesting you might not be with the company much longer. I assured her everything was fine, but the damage was spreading. Marcus excluded me from meetings with our Middle Eastern investors, telling them I was too busy with operational issues to attend. He reassigned my best managers without consultation, moving them to properties where their talents would be wasted. Every week brought new humiliations designed to undermine my authority and credibility. Thanksgiving dinner at our family estate became a battlefield. Mother had insisted we maintain tradition despite the growing tension. As we sat around the mahogany table our father had bought to celebrate his first $1 million year, I finally confronted Marcus. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, setting down my wine glass. "We're supposed to be building Dad's legacy together." Marcus laughed, a cold sound that made Sophie flinch. "Dad's legacy? You mean the empire I'm running while you play resort designer? I've generated 60% of our growth over the last 5 years. Using my resources, my company's money." "Our company?" I corrected. "I own 40%, remember." His face darkened. "For now." Mother tried to intervene, her voice trembling. "Please, both of you. Your father wouldn't want this fighting." "Dad's not here," Marcus snapped. "And maybe it's time everyone accepted that this company needs single leadership, not a committee." Sophie, who'd been silent until then, spoke up. "Marcus, what you're doing to Lucinda is wrong and possibly illegal. As head of legal, I'm warning you to stop." "Stay out of this, Sophie. You barely understand how business works." "I understand employment law," she shot back. "And I understand breach of fiduciary duty." The dinner ended with Marcus storming out, but not before he leaned close to me and whispered, "You should start updating your resume." Over the next 2 months, I documented everything. Every redirected email, every excluded meeting, every whispered conversation that stopped when I entered a room. I recorded phone calls where Derek questioned my decisions in front of staff. I saved emails where Marcus overrode my authority. I built a file that would protect me legally, but more importantly, I started building something else entirely. The writing was on the wall. Marcus wanted me out, and he had the CEO title to make it happen. But I'd learnt something from watching my father build his empire. The smartest moves are the ones nobody sees coming. While Marcus plotted my professional execution, I was planning my resurrection. That Monday morning arrived with Miami's typical December sunshine, bright and warm, mocking the cold dread in my stomach. Marcus's email had arrived at 6 a.m., marked urgent and confidential. The message was brief: board meeting 8 a.m. conference room A. Your attendance is mandatory. A conference room. A occupied the 40th floor's northeast corner, its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Biscayne Bay's turquoise waters. I'd chosen this room's location myself during the building's design phase, believing natural beauty inspired better business decisions. Now it would witness my professional execution. I arrived at 7:55, wearing my best Armani suit, the navy one Dad had bought me when I closed my first major deal. The room was already populated with Marcus's carefully selected audience. Derek sat at Marcus's right hand, shuffling papers with practiced efficiency. 3 board members occupied the table's far end. Patricia Walsh, a 70-year-old hotel industry veteran who'd always supported Marcus. Richard Steinberg, whose law firm had handled our family's business for decades. And James Morrison, our newest board member, someone Marcus had personally recruited. Harold Steinberg, our corporate counsel, and Richard's younger brother stood near the window, holding a manila folder that undoubtedly contained my termination papers. The scene was perfectly staged, a corporate theatre production, with everyone knowing their roles except the intended victim. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Lucinda, we need to discuss your future with Meridian Luxury Resorts." I sat down slowly, pulling out my leather notebook and Mont Blanc pen, the one Dad had given me for my college graduation. "I'm listening." Derek cleared his throat and began reading from a prepared statement. "Over the past 6 months, our audit has revealed concerning patterns in your department's operations. Budget overruns on the Bali project exceeding $20 million. The budget was cut by $20 million, I interjected calmly. The original approved budget was $50 million. I have the board's signed approval. Revised budgets supersede original approvals." Derek continued without acknowledging my point. "Additionally, we've lost 5 major accounts under your management, representing $8 million in annual revenue. Accounts that were transferred to your management without my knowledge or consent." Marcus raised his hand, silencing both of us. "Lucinda, this isn't a debate. The board has lost confidence in your ability to serve as Chief Operations Officer." Patricia Walsh nodded solemnly. "These are difficult times requiring unified leadership. Your resistance to new management strategies has become problematic." "My resistance to sabotage and corporate malfeasance, you mean?" Harold Steinberg stepped forward, placing the manila folder on the table. "Mrs. Hastings, we're offering a generous severance package. 6 months' salary, full benefits continuation, and a strong letter of recommendation. In exchange, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement and a 2-year non-compete clause." I opened the folder, scanning the documents with practiced efficiency. The terms were exactly what I'd expected, designed to silence and sideline me, while appearing generous to any outside observer. The non-compete clause was particularly restrictive, preventing me from working in any capacity in the luxury hospitality industry within North America. "The terms are non-negotiable," Marcus added, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "You can take a few minutes to review, but we need your decision today." I looked up from the papers, meeting his eyes directly. For 3 months, I'd imagined this moment, rehearsed my response, prepared for every contingency. But sitting there watching my brother savor his perceived victory, I felt something unexpected. Not anger or sadness, but absolute clarity. I stood up, straightened my suit jacket, and smiled. Not a forced smile or a bitter one, but the genuine smile of someone who sees the whole board, while their opponent only sees the next move. "Thank you for finally showing your true colors, Marcus." The room temperature seemed to drop. Marcus's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion, then to something close to fear as I picked up the pen and began signing the documents without hesitation or complaint. "Why are you smiling?" His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I finished signing, placed the pen down gently, and looked at each person in the room. "You'll find out soon enough." Harold quickly gathered the signed papers, clearly eager to end this uncomfortable scene. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Your company access will be terminated immediately." "Of course." I picked up my notebook and pen, Dad's gifts that no longer belonged in this building. "I assume I can take my personal items?" "Within reason," Derek said, trying to regain control of the narrative. "No company documents or client files." "I wouldn't dream of it." As I walked toward the door, Marcus called out, "Lucinda, this is for the best. You'll see that eventually." I paused at the threshold, looking back at my brother one last time. His hands were trembling slightly, papers rustling in his grip. He knew something was wrong, but couldn't identify what. That tremor in his hands was the first crack in his carefully constructed coup. "Marcus," I said softly, "Dad once told me that empires built on betrayal always fall, but those built on loyalty stand forever. You might want to remember that." The security guards waited outside 2 men I'd known for years who couldn't meet my eyes. The elevator ride to my office felt both endless and far too brief. Jennifer was waiting, tears streaming down her face as she helped me pack my personal items into boxes. Photos from resort openings, awards from industry associations, the small Buddha statue from our Bali partners, each item a reminder of what I'd built and what Marcus thought he'd taken from me. Word spread through the building like wildfire. By the time security escorted me through the lobby, dozens of employees had gathered. Some were crying, others looked shocked, and a few appeared angry. These people had been more than staff. They'd been my extended family, my trusted partners in building something extraordinary. "This isn't over," Jennifer whispered as she hugged me goodbye. "We all know what really happened." As I walked through those glass doors for what Marcus believed was the last time, I thought about the email sitting in my draft folder, scheduled to send in exactly 1 hour. The email that would begin the complete unraveling of everything Marcus thought he'd won. He'd taken my title, my office, my formal position, but he'd forgotten the most important lesson our father taught us in hospitality: relationships are everything. And I'd spent 15 years building relationships he couldn't steal with a signature. 3 months before that morning in Conference Room A, I'd received an unexpected call from James Chen Wong, a Singapore-based billionaire, whose portfolio included 40 luxury properties across Asia. He'd been following my work, particularly the Bali project, and wanted to discuss a partnership opportunity. We met secretly at his private suite in the Four Seasons, a neutral location where Meridian's eyes couldn't reach. "Miss Hastings," he said in perfectly accented English, "I've been watching your career with great interest. Your understanding of cultural sensitivity combined with luxury service is exactly what my next venture requires." "I'm flattered, Mr. Wong, but I have obligations to my family's company." He smiled knowingly. "For now, but I've been in business long enough to recognize when talent is being wasted. Your brother is threatened by you. You don't know Marcus. I know men like him. They inherit what others build and mistake ownership for ability. When he moves against you, and he will, I want you to know you have options." That conversation planted a seed that grew over the following weeks as Marcus's sabotage intensified. I began researching, planning, preparing for a possibility I'd never previously considered starting over without Meridian. Using my personal funds and a loan against my inheritance, I quietly incorporated Azure Horizons Hospitality, a company that existed only on paper, but would soon become Marcus's worst nightmare. The real coup was the people. Over 15 years, I'd hired, trained, and mentored the best talent in luxury hospitality. Maria Rodriguez, our head chef, had earned 2 Michelin stars under my guidance. David Kim, our IT director, had revolutionized our booking systems and guest experience technology. Susan Blake had transformed our spa services into destinations unto themselves. These weren't just employees. They were artists in their fields, and their loyalty was to me, not to Meridian's corporate structure. One by one, I met with them privately, always outside the office, always in complete confidence. I didn't ask them to leave Meridian immediately. That would have been unethical and potentially illegal. Instead, I shared my vision for something new, something where talent would be valued over politics, where innovation would trump tradition, where we could build without the constraints of family drama and corporate bureaucracy. If something were to happen, I told each of them, if I were no longer at Meridian, would you consider joining me in building something better? Every single one said yes without hesitation. The masterstroke was the Miami property, that small hotel where my father had started his empire. Marcus had wanted to sell it for years, calling it a drain on resources, a sentimental liability. But I'd convinced the board to keep it, arguing for its historical significance to our brand. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been negotiating with the board members individually, offering to buy it personally through a shell company. They agreed, happy to offload what they saw as an underperforming asset while keeping Marcus appeased. James Chen Wong committed $500 million to Azure Horizons, but with specific conditions. The funding would only activate if I was no longer employed by Meridian, protecting both of us from potential legal challenges. We identified 3 development sites: a private island in the Maldives, perfect for an ultra-exclusive resort, a clifftop location in Santorini with unobstructed sunset views, and a historic property in Kyoto that could become the definitive luxury ryokan experience for Western travelers. Every detail was meticulously planned, every contingency considered. Legal documents were drafted by Benjamin Torres, a Harvard-trained attorney who specialized in hospitality ventures and had no connection to the Steinberg firm. Operating agreements were structured to protect my team from non-compete challenges. Marketing strategies were developed that would leverage my personal brand, which I'd carefully cultivated independent of Meridian. The morning of my termination, while I sat in that conference room signing Marcus's papers, 15 resignation letters sat in 15 different desks, all dated for 2 weeks, hence all citing new opportunities and personal growth as their reasons for leaving. These weren't rushed decisions, but carefully orchestrated moves in a chess game Marcus didn't even know he was playing. Jennifer's role was crucial. As my executive assistant, she had access to information and relationships throughout the company. She stayed behind as my eyes and ears documenting the chaos that would soon engulf Meridian. Her first report came just 3 hours after my departure. Marcus called an all-hands meeting, she texted. Told everyone you left to pursue other interests and that Derek would be taking over your responsibilities. The silence was deafening. Maria walked out in the middle of his speech. By that evening, my scheduled email had been sent to every major hospitality journalist, blogger, and industry insider in my network. It was professionally worded, simply stating that I was no longer with Meridian Luxury Resorts and would be announcing my next venture soon. I didn't mention Marcus or the circumstances of my departure. I didn't need to. The industry was small enough that everyone would draw their own conclusions. Sophie called that night, her voice a mixture of anger and admiration. Marcus is in his office with Derek and the lawyers. They're trying to figure out what you're planning. He keeps saying you couldn't have prepared anything this fast. He always underestimated me, I replied. The board members are starting to ask questions. Patricia Walsh wants to know why you smiled when you signed the papers. Tell them they'll understand soon enough. 5 travel bloggers with a combined following of 8 million readers posted about my departure that same day. They didn't attack Marcus directly, but their message was clear. Meridian had lost its visionary, and they were eager to see what I would do next. The post generated thousands of comments, many from VIP program members, expressing disappointment and asking how they could follow me to my next venture. Marcus tried calling me that night, but I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice strained. Lucinda, whatever you're planning, we can discuss this. Call me back. But there was nothing to discuss. He'd made his choice in that boardroom, and I'd made mine 3 months earlier. The difference was that my choice was based on building something new, while his was based on destroying something that threatened him. In the end, that difference would determine everything. The unraveling began slowly, then accelerated beyond Marcus's ability to control it. The first resignation letter appeared on his desk exactly 2 weeks after my termination, as legally required. David Kim, our IT director, gave notice that he'd accepted a position with a startup effective immediately after his 2-week notice period. Marcus barely blinked, telling Derek to promote David's assistant. 3 days later, 4 more resignations arrived simultaneously. The head of guest services, the director of event planning, the lead concierge trainer, and the senior procurement manager all submitted carefully worded letters citing new opportunities. Derek assured Marcus these were coincidental, just the normal turnover any large company experiences. The real blow came when Maria Rodriguez scheduled a meeting with Marcus for the following Monday. She arrived wearing a simple black dress instead of her chef's whites, carrying a single envelope. I'm resigning effective immediately, she announced, placing the letter on his desk. My contract allows for immediate departure if I'm offered a position as executive chef at a competing establishment. Marcus's face went pale. Maria, you're the face of our culinary program. We have 3 Michelin stars because of you. You have 3 Michelin stars because Lucinda gave me the freedom and resources to innovate. Without her vision, I'm just another chef cooking someone else's menu. We'll double your salary. Maria laughed, a sound that echoed through the executive floor. This isn't about money, Marcus. It never was. The Michelin inspectors called within 48 hours of Maria's departure, scheduling a review to reassess the consistency of the culinary experience at our flagship properties. Food bloggers started speculating about where Maria would resurface, with several noting that wherever she went, they would follow. Week 3 brought catastrophe. Sheikh Abdullah Al Rashid, who'd been negotiating a $200 million partnership to bring Meridian to Dubai, called Marcus personally to withdraw from negotiations. I do business with people I trust, the sheikh said bluntly. Your sister earned that trust over 5 years. You destroyed it in 5 minutes. My investment will go elsewhere. Marcus convened an emergency board meeting, but it backfired spectacularly. Patricia Walsh, his strongest supporter, had done her own investigation into the recent departures. 8 department heads gone in 3 weeks, she said, her voice sharp with accusation. 15 more have submitted notice. Our stock price has dropped 15%. What exactly happened with Lucinda Marcus? She was undermining company leadership, Marcus stammered. By generating 60% of our revenue growth, James Morrison interjected. I've been reviewing the real numbers, not Derek's creative interpretations. Every property Lucinda managed outperformed projections. Every property she didn't is underperforming. Derek tried to interject with prepared statistics, but Richard Steinberg cut him off. My brother Harold says Lucinda signed the termination papers without argument, smiled and walked out. In 40 years of corporate law, he's never seen anything like it. She knew something. What did she know, Marcus? The answer came the next morning when Hospitality Industry News broke the story. Azure Horizons Hospitality announces revolutionary luxury concept with $500 million funding. The press release was perfectly crafted. Azure Horizons would redefine luxury hospitality by combining environmental sustainability with uncompromising service. James Chen Wong was quoted praising my vision and leadership. 15 former Meridian employees were named as founding team members, each bringing their unique expertise to the venture. The Miami property, my father's original hotel, would serve as our flagship location after a complete eco-luxury renovation. Marcus's hands shook as he read the announcement in his office, Derek standing frozen beside him. They'd tried to cage me with a non-compete clause, but Benjamin Torres had found the loophole. The clause was only enforceable if I'd been terminated for cause. Being fired for budget overruns that were actually budget cuts and lost accounts that were forcibly transferred didn't constitute cause under Florida employment law. The private investigator Marcus hired reported back with more bad news. I'd been meeting with potential partners for months, all completely legal, all outside of work hours. The incorporation of Azure Horizons predated my termination. Every move had been vetted by legal counsel. There was nothing Marcus could challenge without exposing his own misconduct. Jennifer leaked me the security footage of Marcus in his office that day, pacing like a caged animal, throwing papers, screaming at Derek about how this was impossible. He called our mother, begging her to intervene to convince me to stop. But Eleanor Hastings had finally seen enough. "You brought this on yourself," she told him coldly. "I stayed quiet when you manipulated your father's will. I said nothing when you sabotaged your sister's projects. But I won't help you avoid the consequences of your choices." The media coverage was ruthless but fair. Forbes ran a follow-up to their earlier profile, From Fired to Funded, How Lucinda Hastings Turned Corporate Betrayal into Entrepreneurial Triumph. The Wall Street Journal analyzed the mass exodus from Meridian, calling it a cautionary tale of nepotism and ego-destroying shareholder value. Travel and Leisure magazine featured a preview of Azure Horizons properties, generating 12,000 advance bookings before we'd opened a single door. Marcus made one desperate attempt at reconciliation, showing up at my temporary office unannounced. Security stopped him at the entrance, but I agreed to see him in the lobby, a public space where he couldn't make a scene. "Lucinda, please," he began, his designer suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "We can work this out. Come back to Meridian. I'll make you co-CEO. You had that chance years ago. The board is threatening a no-confidence vote. Derek's been fired. The company is falling apart." "The company isn't falling apart, Marcus. Your leadership is." He grabbed my arm as I turned to leave, desperation replacing his usual arrogance. "You're destroying Dad's legacy." I pulled free, looking at the brother I'd once idolized, now reduced to begging in a hotel lobby. "No, Marcus, I'm rebuilding it without you." The shareholders' meeting happened 2 days later. Sophie called me immediately after her voice mixing relief with vindication. 67% voted no confidence. "Marcus has been removed as CEO effective immediately. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow." "About what?" "They want to merge Meridian with Azure Horizons, with you as CEO of the combined entity." I sat in my new office, looking at the photo of my father on my desk, the one from the day he'd opened his first hotel. He was smiling confident, ready to build something from nothing. That's what I'd learnt from him, not Marcus. Sometimes you have to burn down what exists to build something better. "Set the meeting," I told Sophie, "but they won't like my terms." The boardroom at Meridian's headquarters had been redecorated since my termination. Derek's modern minimalist influence replacing the warm woods and maritime paintings I'd selected. But power has a way of revealing itself regardless of decor, and as I entered that room, 7 weeks after being escorted out by security, the power dynamic had completely reversed. Patricia Walsh stood when I entered, a gesture of respect she'd never shown before. James Morrison actually applauded, earning sharp looks from the other board members. Richard Steinberg couldn't meet my eyes, his legal mind undoubtedly calculating the potential lawsuits Meridian faced from shareholders over Marcus's mismanagement. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, no longer in the CEO's chair, but relegated to a corner seat like a chastised child. His $1,000 haircut couldn't hide the grey that had appeared at his temples, and his usually perfect posture had collapsed into something defensive and small. "Lucinda?" Patricia began, her tone carefully modulated. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "I'm here out of respect for my father's legacy," I replied, taking a seat, but not the one they'd indicated. I chose my own position directly across from Marcus. "And curiosity about what you think you have to offer." Richard Steinberg cleared his throat. "The board has voted unanimously to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Luxury Resorts. The position you gave my brother because of his chromosomes rather than his competence." Patricia flinched. "Mistakes were made. We acknowledge that. You enabled him," I said flatly. "Every one of you knew he was sabotaging me, and you did nothing because it was easier than confronting the golden sun." "That's not entirely fair," James Morrison protested. "Isn't it? Where were you when he cut my barley budget? When he transferred my clients? When he held secret meetings to undermine my credibility?" I looked at each of them in turn. "You were counting your dividends and hoping the problem would resolve itself." Sophie entered then, carrying a stack of documents. As Chief Legal Officer, she'd remained neutral during the conflict, but her small smile told me where her loyalties lay. She distributed the papers with professional efficiency. "These are the terms Azure Horizons is willing to consider for a potential merger," she announced. Patricia read the first page and gasped. "You want complete control." "I want CEO and chairwoman positions with a board restructured to include James Chen Wong and 3 other members of my choosing. Marcus retains his 40% ownership, but with no voting rights for 5 years. He can collect dividends, but has no say in operations." "That's outrageous." Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I'm the largest single shareholder." "You're also the man who lost $300 million in market value in 7 weeks, I counted. "Your name is now toxic in the industry. Hotels and Travel magazine called you the worst hospitality executive of the decade. You're lucky I'm offering you anything." "What about the rest of the terms?" Richard asked, still reading. "All terminated employees get offers to return with 20% salary increases and guaranteed positions. Maria Rodriguez receives full creative control of all culinary operations. Azure Horizons' 3 properties become part of the merged entity rebranded as the Meridian Azure Collection." "And if we refuse?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Then Azure Horizons continues as planned. We'll have 3 properties operational within 18 months. Your leaked internal projections show Meridian losing another 40% market value without the talent that's already left. Your choice is simple: merge and survive, or compete and fail." The room fell silent except for the sound of papers rustling. Marcus stared at the table, his fingers drumming a nervous pattern. I could see him calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to salvage his pride, if not his position. "I need guarantees," he said suddenly. "If I agree to this, I need assurances that my ownership stake remains protected." "Your ownership was never at risk, Marcus. Only your ability to destroy value with it." "And what would my role be?" The question cost him each word seemingly pulled from his throat. "Brand ambassador. You'll attend events, smile for photos, charm investors. All the things you're actually good at, none of the things you're not." The insult landed, but Marcus had no ammunition left to fire back. He looked at our mother, who'd been silent in her board observer seat. Eleanor Hastings stood slowly, her 72 years showing in her careful movements, but not in her sharp gaze. "I've stayed out of this fight perhaps longer than I should have. But I'll say this now, Robert would be ashamed of what happened in this company after his death. Marcus, you let jealousy and entitlement poison something beautiful. Lucinda, you've shown strength your father would have admired. The merger makes sense, but more importantly, it's what Robert would have wanted his children working together, even if the terms have had to be adjusted." Her words carried the weight of maternal authority and board influence. One by one, the board members nodded their agreement. Marcus was the last to speak, his voice barely audible. "I accept the terms." Benjamin Torres entered with the official documentation, hundreds of pages, that would remake Meridian Luxury Resorts into something new. As I signed my name as CEO and chairwoman, I thought about that morning 7 weeks ago when I'd signed very different papers in this same building. "There's one more thing," I said as the signing concluded. "The Miami property, Dad's first hotel. It becomes the Robert Hastings Heritage Center, a training facility for hospitality students from underserved communities. full scholarships, real-world experience, and job placement at our properties. Marcus looked up sharply. That could cost millions annually. It will. And it will generate something priceless: loyalty and talent for generations. Something you never understood, Marcus. Dad's real legacy wasn't the buildings or the bank accounts. It was the people he inspired and the opportunities he created. The meeting ended with handshakes and forced pleasantries. As I walked to the elevator, Marcus caught up with me. "That smile," he said quietly. "When I fired you, you'd already planned everything." "Not everything. I didn't plan for you to be so predictable in your pettiness. That was just a bonus." "I could have been a good CEO," he insisted, one last grasp at validation. "No, Marcus, you couldn't. Being CEO isn't about having power. It's about knowing how to use it. You used it to feed your ego. I'll use it to build something lasting." The elevator doors closed between us, and I descended to the lobby where my new team waited. Maria had prepared champagne and the traditional foods from each culture represented in our properties. David had created a presentation showing our 5-year projections. Susan had arranged spa treatments for everyone, insisting that celebration required relaxation. Jennifer, now my chief of staff, handed me a glass and raised her own. "To the empire that rises from betrayal's ashes." "No," I corrected, thinking of my father's words. "To the empire built on loyalty that will stand forever." 1 year later, I stood on the terrace of our Maldives property, watching the sunset paint the Indian Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The Meridian Azure collection had become the 3rd largest luxury resort chain in America, with 20 properties across 4 continents. But numbers on spreadsheets couldn't capture the real transformation. Marcus had adapted to his role as brand ambassador with surprising grace, perhaps finding relief in no longer carrying responsibilities beyond his capabilities. He attended charity galas and industry conferences, his natural charm finally serving a purpose that didn't destroy value. We spoke cordially at company events, the sharp edges of our conflict softened by time and success. Sophie had flourished as chief legal officer, her expertise protecting the company, while her integrity ensured we never needed protection from ourselves. She'd handled 17 acquisition deals in 12 months, each one expanding our reach while maintaining our standards. Mother visited each property quarterly, not as a board member, but as our most discerning guest, offering feedback that came from decades of being a hospitality wife and widow. Her suite at the Miami Heritage Center had become a pilgrimage site for young staff members seeking wisdom about the industry and life. The numbers told one story: 8,000 employees, 96% satisfaction ratings, $3 billion in annual revenue. But the human story mattered more. Maria had earned her 3rd Michelin star and opened a culinary academy at our Kyoto property. David's technology innovations had been licensed to other chains, generating millions in passive income. Susan's wellness programs had become the industry standard, copied but never quite replicated. Jennifer interrupted my reflection with a satellite phone call. "It's the president of Starwood Capital. They want to discuss an acquisition offer." "How much?" $5 billion. I laughed, remembering when Marcus had thought firing me would protect his empire. "Tell them we're not for sale. We're just getting started." That evening, James Chen Wong joined me for dinner on the beach, our feet in the sand, the simplicity contrasting with our usual 5-star experiences. "Any regrets?" he asked, his astute eyes studying my face. "About Marcus, no. He made his choices and they led us here. And your father, what would he think?" I considered the question, watching hermit crabs navigate the shoreline with determined purpose. He'd be proud that the company survived and thrived. Maybe disappointed in how we got here, but ultimately pleased with where we ended up. "The hospitality industry has changed because of what you've built," James observed. "Other companies are restructuring, promoting based on merit rather than tradition. You've started something bigger than just a business success." Someone once told me that empires built on betrayal always fall, but those built on loyalty stand forever. I'm just trying to prove him right. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Congratulations on the Morocco announcement. Dad would have loved that property." It was the first genuinely warm communication we'd had since everything unraveled. I replied, "Thank you. Your presentation to the investors was perfect. Dad would have been proud of that too." Maybe that was the real victory. Not the resorts or the revenue, but finding a way for broken trust to evolve into functional cooperation. Marcus would never again be the brother who protected me on playgrounds and taught me to negotiate with our parents for later curfews. But he could be a colleague who understood his limitations and worked within them. The Bali resort had finally opened 6 months ago, built to my original vision with the full $50 million budget. At the ribbon cutting, local officials blessed the property with traditional ceremonies, and our first guests were the workers' families who'd built it. Marcus attended, standing in the background while I spoke, but his applause seemed genuine when the crowd cheered. 3 of my original VIP members had followed us from Meridian, bringing their networks with them. Mrs. Chen's family now exclusively booked Azure properties, and she'd become an unofficial grandmother to our younger staff members, dispensing advice and dim sum with equal generosity. The training centre at Dad's first hotel had graduated its first class of 50 students, each one placed in entry-level positions across our properties. One graduate, a young woman from Liberty City named Keisha, reminded me of myself at that age, hungry, determined, willing to work 18-hour days to prove herself. I'd personally mentored her, seeing in her eyes the same fire that had driven me to build something from nothing. Derek Thompson had been quietly blacklisted from the industry after word spread about his role in the attempted coup. Last I heard, he was selling real estate in Nebraska. His corporate rating days ended by his association with failure. Sometimes karma doesn't need help, just time. As the stars emerged over the Indian Ocean, I thought about that morning in Conference Room A when I'd smiled at my brother's betrayal. That smile had cost him everything he'd stolen from me, but it had given me something more valuable, the chance to build what should have existed all along. My phone rang again. It was Marcus, unusual for him to call twice in one day. "Lucinda, I've been thinking," he began, his voice uncertain. "Would you be open to discussing a new resort in Japan? Not Kyoto, but Osaka. I've been developing relationships there, legitimate ones, and I think there's an opportunity." "Send me the proposal," I replied, surprising myself with the openness. "If the numbers work and the concept fits our brand, we'll consider it." "Really? You'd trust me with that?" "I'd trust you to do what you do well, Marcus, identify opportunities and build relationships. The rest of the team would handle operations and execution." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, for everything. I let fear and ego destroy what we could have built together. We're building it now, just differently than either of us imagined." After ending the call, I walked back to my villa, where tomorrow's schedule awaited a conference call with potential partners in New Zealand, a review of sustainable building materials for our Costa Rica project, and a video interview with a hospitality management program about female leadership in traditionally male industries. But tonight I simply sat on my deck, listening to the ocean's rhythm, and felt grateful. Not for the success or the vindication, but for the lesson learned when someone shows you who they really are. Through their actions, believe them. And when they knock you down, get back up, dust yourself off, and build something so magnificent that your recovery becomes their regret. The empire hadn't fallen. It had been reborn stronger and more beautiful than before. And that transformation started with a smile, a simple expression that said, "I see what you're doing, I'm prepared for it, and I'm going to transcend it." What would you have done in my position? Would you have fought back immediately? Or would you have played the long game like I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about triumph over betrayal and building success from setback. Share this with anyone who needs reminding that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but massive success. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, your current situation isn't your final destination. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something far greater than you ever imagined.